This is another sign of the times, an analysis and a commentary. Anger spreads over burning of Korans. The anger over the American military's burning of Korans has claimed at least 10 more lives as rage continues to explode across the country and begins to reverberate in international policy. 10 Afghan civilians protesting the Koran burnings died Friday, most of gunshot wounds, although one protester was trampled to death, bringing the death toll since the violence started to 24, according to local officials and emergency room doctors. An apology by President Obama on Thursday failed to keep thousands off the streets in Kabul and around the country, in light of the apology, which was attacked by Republican critics. The United States postponed plans to apologize to the Pakistani government for the killing of 24 Pakistani soldiers last November at a border base in order to avoid further political fallout in an election year, a Defense Department official said, after German soldiers were pelted with stones by an angry crowd in Takhar province in northern Afghanistan. The German military decided to withdraw its soldiers from a small base there several weeks earlier than planned. The base had just 50 soldiers, so the withdrawal will have little impact, but the early departure appeared symbolic of a growing disengagement by members of the NATO coalition. France announced last month that it would bring home its troops in 2013, a year earlier than expected. It was unclear on Friday night whether, after 4 days of protests, the violence that has rolled through the country was finally spent, or at the Koran burning had uncorked an inexhaustible wail of fury over the continuing presence of Western troops after 10 years of war. In some measure, the angry demonstrations were to be expected in a religious country fed up with foreigners, but the tension this week seems more pervasive and irresolvable than in the past. In other words, it's worse than before. Perhaps the Afghanistan war has gone on just a little too long. The worst violence was in Herat province in the west on the Iranian border, where 7 people were killed. Protesters there were armed, and some appeared to be agents provocateurs, government officials said. People were on their way home after the prayer when a number of opposition and agitator people, misusing the pure emotions of the people, urged them to go toward the United States consulate in the city, said the spokesman for Herat's provincial government. On the way to the consulate, some of these riotous people, who were armed, opened fire and were throwing rocks. One of the vehicles hit by gunfire was a police truck full of ammunition, which exploded, sending bullets in all directions and wounding 65 people, he said. Several residents suggested that Iranian agents were at work behind the scenes. 2 protesters died in Khost province, near the Pakistan border, and 1 in Baghlan province. In Kabul, despite larger numbers of protesters on the streets, only a handful were injured. The Interior Minister adopted a nuanced strategy that encouraged the protesters to express themselves peacefully, but also put in place a phalanx of police units to keep the most menacing from making their way to the center of the city. Riot police officers, backed up by heavily armed special units and some 40 police trucks, faced down an estimated 4,000 men wielding rocks and sticks after Friday prayer. At one point, as the 2 groups neared each other, protesters threw rocks and shouted, but the police did not fire and eventually moved the protesters back. A few of the protesters were waving the Taliban's white flag. Some wore head wrappings, bearing the jihad slogan, "I sacrifice myself," and protesters throughout the city shouted, "Death to America." The police also broke up another crowd of about 1,000 in central Kabul, first by driving trucks into the crowd to disperse it, and then by chasing the protesters on foot and hitting them with rubber batons. Some officers said they did the job despite sympathizing with the protesters. "We try to stop the demonstrators from violence and looting," said a Kabul police officer. "That is our job, but if I were an ordinary person, not a policeman, I would have joined the demonstrations," he added. NATO said it was still investigating what led to the decision to burn Korans and other religious texts. Early reports said that the books had inflammatory messages written in them from detained Taliban suspects. Most of the Korans that were rescued from the flames are still at Bagram Air Base in a locked container. They are viewed as evidence, a NATO spokesman said. A few of the Korans were taken out of the base by Afghan employees. For now, the absence of lethal violence in Kabul belies a deep frustration that appeared in interviews with police officers and protesters alike, a sense that justice has not yet been done, and a suspicion that the United States, while apologizing, will not hold anyone to account. Just by saying, "I am sorry," nothing can be solved, said Wali Mohammed, one of the protesters. "We want an open trial for those infidels who have burned our Holy Koran." Mohammed Anwar, an off-duty police officer, had joined the protesters on Friday and seemed barely able to contain his fury. "I will take revenge from the infidels, what they have done to our Holy Koran, and I will kill them whenever I get the chance," he said as he walked with a crowd of protesters wielding rocks and sticks. In other words, maybe it was not a very good idea to burn the Korans. This is causing a lot of anger towards NATO and the United States. Yes, perhaps it's past time to leave Afghanistan. There's nothing more to win there, and the war will most likely end up badly. This, too, is another sign of the end of times as we know them, transition days, which is a time of extraordinary changes, happenings, and events. Everything that must change quickly or rapidly, and for the better, because it's about what kind of world are we leaving to the future generations, and that should be a very important question to ask. Mark chapter 13, verse 14. "But when ye shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing where it ought not, let them that reads or hears understand. Then let them that be in Judea flee to the mountains." 15. "And let him that is on the housetop not go down into the house, neither enter therein, to take anything out of his house." 16. "And let him that is in the field not turn back again, for to take up his garment." 17. "But woe to them that are with child, and to them that give nurse in those days." 18. "And pray ye that your flight be not in the winter." 19. "For in those days shall be affliction, such as was not from the beginning of the creation which God created unto this time, neither shall be." 20. "And except that the Lord had shortened those days, no flesh should be saved. But for the elect's sake, whom he has chosen, he has shortened the days." Yes, it's time for prophecy to be fulfilled. Everything is connected, and everything is numbered. It's also called fate or destiny, and all these are more signs. So, what could possibly happen? Revelation chapter 17, verse 15. "And he said unto me, The waters which thou saw, where the whore stands, are peoples, and multitudes, and nationalities, and languages." 16. "And the 10 horns which thou saw upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. 17. For God has put in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree, and give their kingdom or nation unto the beast, until the words of God shall be fulfilled. 18. And the woman which thou saw is that great city, which reigns over the kings and leaders of the earth. Chapter 18. And after these things I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. 2. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. 3. For all nations have drunk the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings and leaders of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies and luxuries. 4. And I heard another voice from heaven, saying, Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues. 5. For her sins have reached into heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. 6. Reward her even as she rewarded you, and double unto her double, according to her works. In the cup which she has filled, fill to her double. 7. How much she has glorified herself, and lived deliciously, so much torment and sorrow give her. For she says in her heart, I sit a queen, and am no widow, and shall see no sorrow. 8. Therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she shall be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord God who judges her. Yes, it's time for the manifestation of the book of Revelation.